So actually my topic, the theme for this month is the Divine Feminine, and the theme for next month is the Divine Masculine. Am I working now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, excellent. I just need to quit being concerned about things that are none of my business. All right.
You said sex and we all just went.
I know, right? Right, Blue the PA. Okay. Let me regroup. Y'all are throwing me off. I'm never distractible unless you do it. You know that. All right. So yeah, we are going to talk this month about the Divine Feminine and next month about the Divine Masculine. But today I want to kind of set some context for both months and talk about the very human and its intersection with culture and spirituality. So that we can move through the next couple of months understanding the gifts that both of those energies bring us. And we can cease and desist the tendency to make wrong and to say, oh, well, the resurgence of the feminine must mean that we need to repress or suppress or kind of beat down the heads of the masculine. None of that's true. Right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. A couple of pieces before we start. Just some term identification because it's important. And I know that we sometimes have a lot of like note takers in here. I can send you my notes if this is sufficiently fascinating to you. So don't feel the need to take notes rapid fire. Okay. So when we use the word sex, male and female, we're typically referring to biological differences. That can be our plumbing, hormones, actual physical, physiological differences, male, female. Those are sex differences. Gender often or more frequently refers to a cultural aspect, and that's where the terms masculine and feminine come in. Right? So Reginald's sex is male. My sex is female. Both Reginald and I may have blends of masculine and feminine. I feel like there was something else I want to say about that. Yes. So when we talk about gender, it's masculine and feminine. Now the thing to remember is that oftentimes the biological differences influence the cultural differences. So let me go back to say something about our biological differences and give you a very specific example of that. Men, the predominant hormone for men is testosterone. Right? Testosterone has its production has characteristics that go with it. One of the ways we know this is because women, under certain circumstances, are required to take testosterone. And they want to know two things. Can you please make me stop thinking about sex and punching things? So testosterone as a hormone has a very specific urgency to it. An example of a female hormone is oxytocin. Okay, oxytocin is so it surges when we hug, when we stroke the skin, that kind of stuff. It causes the desire to care for, right? So you can imagine how functional this was and is when a woman gives birth to a child. And there's a lot of physical interaction, right? And so it's the care hormone. Those would be examples of actual biological differences, but you can then move them into the cultural realm by saying, how do I say this? Women are, the feminine is more inclined to gather and care for, and the masculine is more inclined to conquered. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. I know that's a lot of meaty stuff, and it's going to become relevant here as we go along, I promise. At least I hope. Okay, so while sex is hardwired into us, culture, or gender, is a cultural phenomenon. All right. So why are we talking about this? Well, now I'm going to move into giving you a very sort of sweeping view of the last million years of history. Very quickly. Right. Okay, so from about a million years ago to about 400,000 years ago, our societies on this planet, human societies, were hunter-gatherer societies. The roles between males and females were very rigid, as far as we can tell. And we had about, from the archaeological and anthropological evidence, about half of the gods of that period were represented by female idols and half by male. Okay, so the thing about a hunter-gatherer society is everybody has a role, but nobody overpowers anybody else, right? So typically it was the men that hunted, the women gathered, but both were responsible for production of food and safety. Say 50%, roughly 50% male, and 50% female gods. About 400,000 years ago, we moved into what was called the horticultural epoch. And what that means is we figured out that you could actually dig in the dirt, plant something, and harvest it. But the planting and harvesting was done, once again, by both sexes, because you could kind of dig and with a stick, and a pregnant woman could do that just as easily as a man. Right? So do you see that although there was role delineation, the food production, the responsibility was male and female. And what we know from that era is that, which by the way began about 10,000 BCE, so 10,000 years ago. 1/3 female deities, 1/3 male deities, 1/3 both. So we still have this evenness of a deity representation. And what we know about the divine is the divine is, but in every culture, in every epoch, we recreate the divine in our own image. Do you know that? Mm-hmm. So we say, this is what God is. Now, it doesn't change God at all. It just changes our understanding. Right? So every culture, every epoch recreates the divine in their own image. All right. So then something very interesting happens. We have the invention of the wheel. We have the idea that we can actually hook up animals, and now we can farm on a larger scale. So we can use a plow. Well, here's where things get interesting, because pregnant women, if they try to plow, what happens?
They can't help it.
They miscarry. Right. It's too much. Right. And so now we have men responsible for food production in the fields, and women responsible for the keeping of the home. That is a very big difference. It's so big that when we go from horticulture to agrarian, or shift from the hoe to the plow, 90% of the deities are male. So we go from 1/3 male, 1/3 female, 1/3 both, to 90% male. Well, I suspect what happened is men actually had a lot more time to create the deity in their own image. And I don't mean to be insulting. That was yeah. And I failed to say earlier that I'm talking in what we call orienting generalizations. Right, so in orienting generalization, men are stronger than women. That's generally true, but may not be specifically true. Does that make sense? Yes. So I'm not trying to lock anything in here. I was looking at the vast data and information and knowledge available from academia. All right. Okay, so now we go to an agrarian setup. Now here's something interesting that happens with the agrarian setup. Because men were so effective with a plow being pulled by animals, they actually finished their food production work sooner. And it created the first wave of free time. I'm serious. First wave of free time. And then two things happened. Men, being driven by testosterone, thought, well, what can I conquer? And so we have the first wave of empire building actually happened at this stage. The second thing is man, humankind, had the ability to go, who am I? What is this place? Why am I here? So two things. I can go out and fight, and I can wonder about my own existence. Now, why does that become important? It becomes important because as man was contemplating the very fact that he existed and beginning to formulate the ideas of a God, of course that God took on masculine characteristics. The other thing that happened as the spirit, see, all of our great spiritual traditions happened during the agrarian phase. And so all of our spiritual practices were created by men. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it may not be the best fit for spiritual practices for women. I'll give you an example. I'm a big fan of a philosopher by the name of Ken Wilber. In fact, a lot of this information is out of his book. And there's this, for men, the big thing, it's meditate. You need to meditate, you need to focus, right? Focus. Ken Wilber says, probably the ultimate spiritual practice for women is dancing at a slumber party. Now, all the women in the room, or anybody who has a sufficient amount of feminine energy in the room, does that make sense to you? You see? You see? Yep. Ronnie, does that make sense to you? Right?
Makes no sense.
Right. Right.
But I'll accept it, so.
Right. But if you could see what I see, when I said that, there was this surge of energy came forth. Right? And so here's the thing, we live, you notice that I talked about that the roles were very rigid. And the roles were very rigid all the way through the Industrial Revolution, where men had this sphere of functioning and women had this sphere of functioning. And it was necessary. What also went with that is the rigidity, so that you were locked into a role, right? It didn't matter if the role fit you or felt right. It was determined by your biology. With very few exceptions, and there are some exceptions. All right, so now we live in the post-industrial information age, where physical strength and women being available to care and nurture and raise children, those roles are no longer rigid, because they don't need to be. It's not required for our evolution, for our survival, for any of those things. Now, there are some really fundamentalist Christians that would say that it is required, but the truth is that it's not. The thing is, we live in a very complex time because we have so many choices. And what we want is for everyone to be calling in and expressing the energies that are appropriate to the shape of their soul. Right? Michael, my partner, and I, we're both sex female, so we're both women. Michael has a very feminine or female parenting style. I'll love you no matter what, honey. You know, it's very unconditional, it's very like that. Me? Yes, I love you. Now get on and do it, or I'm going to kick your little hiney into your room. It's a very masculine parenting style. Here's the limit. Here's where it is. I'm the enforcer. right? And we actually can bring those energies together in a beautiful way. I would never be able to parent with unconditional. I mean, I do unconditionally love my child. I feel like I'm about to just chew on my own shoe here. I do unconditionally love my own child, but it is in my nature, the way that I uniquely express, to be a limit setter with her and be very firm. And there's a beauty in that because it gives me and Michael some freedom. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
With me? Okay, so can you put that first image up there? So this is the caduceus, and it's most commonly recognized as the symbol of the American Medical Association. It has a great deal of esoteric meaning, right? So in this case, I'm going to talk about it just for a second as the energies of masculine and feminine. What we notice is that they are intertwined, but not conjoined. You can go ahead and go to the pretty image, right? So they are intertwined, but not conjoined. See, it's like if there wasn't a purpose for the male, female, and also the masculine and feminine, we probably wouldn't have them. You know what I mean? It's like, why bother creating two different things or allowing those to evolve if there's not some purpose? So we want to acknowledge that it takes both of those polarities, both of those energies to create the whole. Okay, thank you, sir. I want to read you this. We must take care lest we allow biology to excuse or limit expression. So Mr. Sensitive is a gender role that is at odds with the sex role? In some ways, yes. That doesn't mean that men can't or shouldn't become more sensitive. Today it's an imperative. But it simply means men usually have to be educated to do so. And the converse is true. We must also take care to know that both sexes are working. So what's called for is kindness and compassion when we're working with people that are of the opposite sex as us, because they are oftentimes of the opposite gender expression. And that the things that come naturally to us may not come naturally to everyone. Where the traditional sex roles of male and female were once perfectly necessary and appropriate, they are today becoming increasingly outmoded, narrow, and cramped. And so both men and women are struggling for ways to transcend their old roles with, and this is the tricky part, without simply erasing them. Evolution always transcends and includes, incorporates, and goes beyond what came before. Right? So as we investigate this month, the divine feminine, see both energies are good. It's not so good when they get chronically out of balance. And with the advent of the agrarian age, we had this great push of the masculine being in the forefront. Sometimes we call it patriarchy, sometimes we call it patrilineal, those kind of things. The masculine is not bad. There's a time and a place and a perfect function for it. But we live in a culture that has devalued the feminine in many ways for 6,000 years, right? I want to say something about that because it's really important. And this is one of my favorite things about Ken Wilber. He said, you know, there was for the longest time this movement in feminism to say that men suppressed women. And he makes a great point. He says, that requires the belief that men are pigs and women are sheep, which is insulting to both. So my point in showing you the sort of the historical context here is to say, actually these were agreements between the sexes, and actually these had what we would call a techno-economical benefit. But now we're at a time of choice, and we're each calling in the feminine and masculine according to the shape of who we are and what serves. And there is a good argument that says that what is really required in terms of revealing wholeness in the world is a resurgence of the feminine values. Women don't always represent feminine values. There's some, we've got some female members of Congress that are kind of butch, they just, you know what I mean? There's not this quality of the feminine that comes with them. So I've been talking about this and realized that I never sort of did say what we would call these masculine and feminine generalizations. Men tend toward individuality, stressing autonomy, rights, justice, and agency. Women tend toward relational awareness, communion, care, and responsibility. Let me give you an example of this. And again, we're talking about orienting generalizations in the masculine and feminine. We want to go back and really reinforce that, because what we're not doing is pigeonholing people. There's a sort of a tone here in Texas you sometimes can observe in politics.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. All right. And it's this argument, sometimes they call it, I don't know, sometimes it's Tea Party politics. There's a lot of names for it, frontier mentality, whatever. But the way that it, Ronnie, hush your mouth. The way that it breaks down is, what it reminds me of anyway, is somebody just going, you can't tell me what to do. That's what it feels like. If you go to Nevada, they got a lot of that going on too. It's just like a microcultural phenomenon in Nevada. But anyway, so the masculine is concerned with, what are my rights? I have a right to this, right? The feminine is concerned with responsibilities. So to who and what am I responsible? It's not that men are not responsible, that's not what I'm saying. But do you feel the energetic difference? Mm-hmm. I have a right, I have a responsibility. This is called agency, this is called communion. Right? One is driving, one is a little more receptive and embracing. And really, I mean, the easiest way to say it is you can see that in the biological makeup of the masculine, of male and female, right? One is directional, one is receptive. So the thing is that there are these characteristics that I've listed, they tend to recur over and over again in cultures. And so it feels like, to me, for the next 2 months, these are going to be safe qualities and characteristics to talk about. And we'll look at how it is that our greater culture or our world scene might shift with the incorporation of some of the feminine value sphere that, say, Carol Gilligan's a theorist recommends. And we'll look at how might the world work better for everyone with a little bit more balance. So the invitation to each of you, because see, one of the things that I love about masculine and feminine is that my awareness of them allows me to call in or open up to whatever type of energy feels like is called for at any one point in my life or in my day. So I tend to be very, I know y'all are surprised because I'm a little butch on some levels. But I actually have a very deep feminine energy. And so my default actually is always going to be to think more of others than me. And there have been times in my life, once I learned this, like when I was trying to get through school with a learning disability, that I had to say, no, look, I've got this goal, take care of yourself, I'm going for it. right? And I could actually call that in when I realized that's what was required. So I didn't feel like I had to do something that was unnatural to me or unfamiliar. I'm like calling in the energy of the divine to be the wind that is moving me in the direction that I want to go. And we all have that capacity. When we look at something in our lives and decide, I want more of this, or I think I need more of this, that there's actually a power and a presence that we can call forth, call down, call in, call through, whatever you want to say. And this becomes a really useful tool to show up in the world the way that we desire to. And so yeah, that's what we're going to be about the next 2 months. Y'all come back now, you hear? Let's pray. So I'm remembering at the level of one source, one spirit, one mind, one heart, one soul, one reality. There are infinite possibilities. And I am one of those. And so is everyone here. And yet I know within that infinite one, that indivisible source that we call God, there are qualities. And that each of us has those qualities in varying degrees, such that we are each a unique makeup of the masculine and the feminine, of joy, of purpose, of passion, of all of these qualities that we associate with God. We each have those in measure, such that we are absolutely unique in the way that we express. And I know that the journey of consciousness is to become awakened and enlivened to those qualities as they live and move and have being in us and through us. And I know through expanding consciousness that we increase our ability to make choices, to align with the divine impulse as it moves through us. This we might call the precious opportunity of human birth. So in this moment, I'm just going to take a deep breath and be grateful that I live in this place at this time with so much choice, so much awareness, with so many possibilities. And I know that's true for everyone here as well. We are each of us the way that the divine is unique